Well, good morning and welcome to another beautiful sunny day out here in the middle of absolutely nowhere. But you know, I'm here for a reason, because just over there behind me, you'll see this windmill. Now, I'm going to shoot a panorama tonight of this very windmill. Just over the other side of the car there, there's a dam. It's a very small one, but I think it'll suit perfectly for what I have in mind. Now, I'm going to be continuing my series on post-processing. So I don't think I've done this before, so I'm going to be post-processing a panorama. And I think that'll be pretty good. It's a fairly simple scene here. I'll show you now how I'm going to shoot that. And then later on, we'll get back into the editing suite after I've come back here tonight and shot it. And we'll go through the process involved in creating the final image. So let's go and have a look. So this is the scene I'm looking at. Just a small dam. But you know, water, you can't beat water. Just getting a reflection of the Milky Way. Now, I'm facing in a southwesterly direction here. Up the hill there, the Milky Way core is going to set down over the top of this crop in the paddock. The windmill on the right-hand side there, that'll be probably, well, it will be on the right-hand side of the frame. And then, of course, the water here. So I'll probably set the camera up just down here, maybe just over there, so I can get most of this scene. Now, what I'm going to do is shoot either 8 to 10 images on my Nikon Z6 with the 20mm f1.8 lens. I'll shoot that at f2.8, and I'm going to set the ISO at 6400 because I want a good, strong signal to noise ratio there. 15-second shutter speed, and then I'll probably set the camera into a portrait orientation, and I'll be doing an overlap of probably about 50% on all of those shots. So that's why I need 10 shots to get the whole scene in. Now, I'm well aware that you could shoot this whole scene with probably 4 shots in a panorama, or maybe 5, but I'm going to do 8 to 10 because I want to overlap a long way. And I've found that one of the keys to panoramas is to overlap each shot by a fair margin. Now, one of the other things I'll be doing is light painting. So I'll get my torch and I'll be off on the angles, lighting the edges of the water. That's all I need. Probably a little bit on the windmill perhaps. And for half of those 8 to 10 shots, I'll be lighting from this side. And for the other half, I'll go over there and shine the torch across from that side. So in effect, I'm cross-lighting the scene, which is pretty much my standard workflow. Wow, this place is absolutely chock-a-block with mosquitoes. So that can only be worse tonight when I get back here. So I'll have to make sure I prepare for that. It's about a 23 degrees Celsius day today. Tonight I think it's going to get down to about 10 or 11. So it's not too cold. Looking forward to it. All right, we're ready to go. Oh, I'll tell you what, everything gets really dusty and dirty on these dirt roads. A little bit wind today as well, which is probably not helping. But anyway, all set to go. I'll be back here tonight. So I did end up back that night, and I had a gorgeous night to shoot the windmill and the dam. I ended up shooting 8 images. That's all I needed to get plenty of coverage, including the 50% overlap. So I set my settings at ISO 6400, 15 seconds shutter speed, and I was shooting at f2.8 on the Z6 with the 20mm f1.8 lens. So remember, I'm stopping that down to f2.8. Now, I shot these in a portrait orientation, and now we're going to go into the computer, we're going to go through the processing of this panorama and see how we go. So let's have a look. All right, now as usual, we begin this whole project in Lightroom, and you can see I've already done some editing. Now, my aim with all of this is to keep the time frame pretty short because it can get really carried away with editing. So here's the first of my images. You can see I started over on the right hand side. I've shot this at ISO 6400, f2.8 at 15 seconds at 20mm. I've increased the exposure a little bit, plus the contrast, dropped the highlights, a little bit of whites. You can see there. Now, the other thing that I've done here is I have added noise reduction, luminance and contrast plus 32, plus color contrast plus 50. Now, this is on my Z6. I always apply color noise reduction. On other cameras that I use, I don't have to apply color. It just depends on your particular camera. So you play around with that. The Z6 in particular has a bit of a shift to the green. And you can see there's a lot of green air glow already in this image. Now, the other thing I've done, and I always do this, is apply lens corrections. So I've removed chromatic aberration and enabled profile corrections. I do that with 99% of all of my images. Now, the other thing I will do here, I mentioned that green color cast that you get in the Z6. I'm going to actually increase the magenta to about maybe plus 4 or 5, 7, 5, that'll do. So the tint, that takes it away from the green side into the magenta, just a little bit. I've still got plenty of green grass and everything down here. So you can see I've got a number of images down here. These are the next images along the chain. And what I've done, I've already done this, is actually synced all of those together. So my next job is to select them. Okay, so here we go, select the images. Now what I'm going to do here is right click on any one of them, edit in, and what I'm going to do this time is merge to panorama in Photoshop. So what I'm doing, I'm actually sending this image to Photoshop to merge as a pano. Now, I'm fully aware that you can do panos in Lightroom, and I've done plenty of my panoramas in Lightroom before, but today I want to go into Photoshop, and the reason I'm doing that is mainly because I want to do some extra work when I get into Photoshop, so I'm going to have to take it there anyway. So let's just wait until they all open up and we'll come back. All right, you can see what's happened here. They've all opened up here. It's asking me what layout I want for the photo merge. I've just gone to auto. That's the top one there, which is pretty much by default. Down here it says blend images together. That's what I want to do. I'm going to press OK. And what's going to happen now, Photoshop will open, and it will open each of those as a separate layer, and you'll notice that they will have a layer mask already assigned to them. So let's just wait for that to happen. All right, so here we are. Here's our merged pano. It looks pretty good. Now with panos, and I often say this to people, you'll often lose the top and the bottom corners, which you can see here, but that's okay on this image because I overshot it anyway. So I've got plenty of room to spare. I'm going to crop this down a bit later. Just for the moment, you can see all of these layer masks that have been assigned to each of these layers. This looks fantastic. I love my straight horizon. It looks really, really good. So the first thing I'm going to do here is actually flatten the image. So I've just done that so that it is one layer. I can just work on one layer. Now, what I'm going to do is apply a few things specifically to the sky. I love how the foreground looks because that is how I lit it. I love the lighting on that, and I think, you know, I don't need to do a whole lot more to that, but I like it. Oh, one other thing I am going to do is get rid of this lamp post over here. I absolutely hate that lamp post. So actually that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to just zoom in on that a little bit, go to my where are we, clone stamp tool, and I'm going to clone that out. So there's my first job for this video, cloning out something I don't like. There's a number of ways of getting rid of objects like this, but I'm going to use the clone stamp tool, so let's see how we go with it. Hold down the Alt key to select something and just go over it like that. Oops, 100%. Yeah, that's good. Not bad. Not too bad at all. Let's go again. So I'm just rubbing over it, and you can see how it's rubbing out that particular spot. I don't set myself up as a Photoshop guru in any shape or form. I'm just using the tools that are available to us. Anyway, there we go. That's gone. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see the full image a little bit better. There we go. So next thing I'm going to do is go down here and apply an adjustment layer, and I'm going to apply curves adjustment layer. So have a look at this. Curves adjustment layer, that's applied to the whole image here. So I'm going to lift the curve about there and drop it about here. Okay, so what that has actually done is created a contrast in the image. And in particular, what it's done is created a lot of highlights there in the Milky Way. Now, my suggestion is to be a little bit conservative using these tools rather than overdoing it, because we've all seen images that are overblown. So that's before, that's after, before, after. Now, one of the absolutely awesome things about this particular shot was this beautiful zodiacal light which was coming up from the horizon. This was taken not very long after sunset, and at this time of year, so that's October, here in the southern hemisphere, you get this gorgeous zodiacal light which just looks absolutely amazing. Anyway, let's move on. I love that. One thing I'm going to do here though is I don't like what that curves layer has done to the foreground. I like it on the sky but not the foreground. So what I'm going to do, because when you do an adjustment layer you get a layer mask attached, it gives me the option of actually brushing out the foreground of the actual curve. So let's do that. So I'll set my opacity to, well, 100%, why not? Let's do that. Fairly large brush, soft brush, yeah, I like that, that's good. And I'm just going to rub it out. So in other words, I'm bringing the foreground back to where it was before that was applied. Because remember I said I liked it. So I don't want it to be too harsh on that foreground. Okay, so if you look at the mask now up here, you can see that there's a black painting on it because I've just painted that out. But it's still applying to the sky. So if I turn it on and off, you'll see what I'm talking about. See that? Quite simple. Quite simple indeed. Now, one other thing I'm going to do on that layer mask is just looking at the Milky Way. There's a couple of patches here where it's starting to blow out a little bit. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to lower the opacity a bit to about 70–60%. Drop my brush size and just give it a light little dab over there so it's not quite so hot anymore. You won't notice a whole lot of difference here, but it's just enough to stop that blowing out just like it was before. Yeah, much better. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is, sometimes I do this and sometimes I don't, so I'll do it today, is apply a levels adjustment layer. So here it is, and the levels is sort of a contrast adjustment as well as the curves, and you can see what this does when you lift this, or if I drag it a long way, you go a really harsh contrast, but just a conservative little amount. And there we have it. Quite a similar type of adjustment to what we had on our curves. Now, once again, I don't want that to apply to the foreground area, this the water and the dam bank here, etc. So what I'm going to do is copy that layer from my curves adjustment layer down to my levels. So all I have to do there is hold Alt and drag it down. And then it's going to ask me, do I want to replace the layer mask? I say yes. And suddenly you can see what's happened here. The same thing has happened. I've got my adjustment only on the sky region. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? I haven't had to do too much work so far. And you know, I'm not a big person who likes to sit here for hours editing single images. That's not my go. So what I'm going to do is be quicker with my editing. Alrighty, so I'm pretty happy with that. So you may have your own methods of doing your Milky Way editing, and you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's always plenty of things you can do. Now, one of the other things you might like to do is add a photo filter. I do this quite often. So once again, click on the add adjustment layer and click on photo filter. Now you can see the different color that you can get overall the image by clicking on the color here, and you can bring that around to wherever you like to give it a little bit more of the tone of color that you think looks good. Now, strangely enough, I've just added some pink into this, and yet I like what that's doing. It's taken away a little bit of that green. Again, I don't like the overly green, but once again, that's applied to my foreground as well. I don't really want to apply that to the foreground, so what I'm going to do is grab my levels layer mask, hold down Alt on my keyboard and just drag it down. It will ask me if I want to replace it, and I say yes. Once again, that photo filter now is only applied to the sky. Now you can see the difference. It was green, very green. Now it's got a little bit more magenta or pink color. Now, I'm not trying to tell you how to color your images, and yeah, everyone has their preferences with what they like. So I'm just telling you what I like and what I'm going to apply to this particular image. Okay, are we happy with that? Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to do this fairly quickly, so stick with me if you can. First thing I'm going to do is actually what is known as merge visible. So we go up to layer, all of these layers are enabled. I'm going up to layer, down the bottom, merge visible. So it's merging all of the visible layers. In other words, it's flattening the image into one layer here. What I'm going to do now is duplicate that layer. So I go up to layer, duplicate layer. The only reason I'm doing this is so I've got something to refer my changes to. So we'll just leave that one sitting there. So I'm going to work on this top one, and I'm going to do what's known as star minimization. Some of you may have seen this. There's plenty of great videos out there on YouTube from other awesome Nightscape photographers who have some really good tutorials. So I'd suggest you go searching for star minimalization, but I'll show you how to do it on my image. Remember, this is a pano. So here we go up to select, and I'm going to select color range. Then I'm going to go to where it says sample colors. I'm going to go down to highlights. Now there's fuzziness and range. What I'm going to do here is just increase the fuzziness. Now this is variable, okay? That's not the same for every image that you do, and it depends on how far you want to go with it as to how much of an impact it actually has. But let's go to about there. I'm looking at this little black and white selection here to give me a rough idea of what this might look like. So I'll press OK, and what that's done is selected. I've made a selection of stars. It's as simple as that, really. So I'm going back to select again and going down to modify, and I'm going to expand those pixels by 2 pixels. Then I'm going to do the same thing, select, modify, and feather. And we're going to go to feather by 1 pixel. So I've done that. So all that's done is I've expanded the pixels a little bit and feathered the edges on those pixels. Here we go, one more step, and this will just about be done. We go up to filter. We go right down to other and across to minimum. So we click on minimum. It does a little bit of a calculation there. And what I'm looking for here is, firstly, where it says preserve, I want to make sure that's roundness. You can get roundness and squareness. Now obviously stars are round, so I want to make that the parameter. Now the other thing we have here is the radius. You can adjust the radius higher or lower. If I go high, you will notice that you get all these blotchy marks. This is just a little preview here. So it tends to be best under 1 pixel, and I've got 0.8 pixels selected. And what I'm going to do is press OK. And now it's calculating what it needs to do. Doesn't take very long. You can see it there doing its work. And in one moment, we'll have a look at the results. All right, so I'm just going to deselect all of those images by going to select, pressing deselect. And there we have what is known as star minimization. Now, I want you to just compare that to the unstar minimized layer underneath here. So I'll click that one off. See how there's a lot more stars in that one? And this one has been somewhat uncluttered is probably the best way of putting it. And you know, you may not like that look, and if you don't like it, that's fine. You don't even have to worry about doing this step, but I just wanted to show you how it works. So what I'm going to do once again, I'm going to add an adjustment layer onto that top layer here. Here we go, curves adjustment layer. One more time, I'm just going to stretch this a little bit further, a little bit with the highlights, and come down a little bit more with the saturation. And you can see here what that has done. It's added a little bit more bite to this image. It's still, I think, not overdone, but I like the look of it. That beautiful glow coming from the horizon here, it's accentuated that a little bit, and I love that because that was so bright. When I was out there shooting this, I was looking at that thinking, that is fantastic. So that's known as zodiacal light. Okay, now one thing I do want to do again, because I don't want that to apply to my foreground. Remember, I was happy with my foreground the way it was, so I'll show you this again. I'm going to go to the curves, adjustment layer, layer mask, go to my brush tool over here, make that 100%, get a reasonably large brush, which I already have, and just rub it out. You can see what's happening here. I'm rubbing out the foreground and getting it back to how it looked before I applied that curves adjustment layer. So now if I turn that on and off, you'll see it's only affecting the sky, and that's exactly what I want to happen. Okay, now I'm not going to take this image any further than this because I think that looks pretty good just as it is. Now, of course, it still needs cropping, and I'm going to do that back in Lightroom. So I'm just going to leave it exactly where it is for the moment. First thing I'm going to do, however, is flatten the image. So I'm going to go down to Layer, Flatten Image. It says discard hidden layer. Yes, I do want to discard the hidden layer. The reason I'm doing this mainly is because the file sizes are huge. That was a 700 megabyte file. Now, just by flattening the image, I've brought it down to, well, still 324 megabytes, so it's a pretty large file. That's because it's a panorama. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Let's cross out of Photoshop up here. Ask me if I want to save it. I say yes. And that is going to come back into Lightroom in just one moment. You'll see it pop up down here. There it is. Now, what I'm going to do is crop it. So we go to our crop tool. We are now in Lightroom. Crop tool, drag in the edges to about there. The reason I've done this in Lightroom is because I love the Lightroom cropping tool. It's just so easy to use, and it's somewhat reversible. If you go too far in the first crop, you might think, oh, hang on, I've gone too far. Just bring it back to what you think it should be. Oh, now one thing I will mention here, and you can try this yourself and see if you like it. Dehaze. If you apply some dehaze in Lightroom to the image, what you will get is this gorgeous extra contrast boost, especially in that Milky Way. Apply it with caution, but you will notice that you've got this gorgeous amount of extra contrast, which I think looks pretty good. Okay, so hit F on the keyboard for full screen, and there we have our merged panorama, 8 panels with a little bit of editing done in Photoshop, but overall I think it looks absolutely stellar. Now this windmill here on the night, just to explain, it was moving, so it may be a little bit soft and blurry simply because of the movement that was actually there on the night. And just in a minute I'm going to show you another image I took on this exact same night, just a close-up of the windmill, which was not a pano, but it was a Milky Way stacked image. I used sequator to stack the sky, and that one came out so beautiful as well. But overall, I love this image. I think it has come out really, really well. And so there you have it. I'm absolutely wrapped with how that's come out. Now, panoramas don't have to be overly complicated. All they are is more than one image stitched together. The processing is the same pretty much as if you were doing just a single tripod position image. So thanks so much for joining me. As I said, this is part of a series I'm doing on post-processing. I've got heaps more images and heaps more captures that I want to present to you, highlighting and showing the different forms of my editing process for my Nightscape images. So I hope you'll join me next time when I come with another one. I've got quite a few interesting ones. I've got star trails, I've got stacked images for noise reduction, and all sorts of different locations. So look forward to seeing you next time when you join me under the night sky somewhere, and I'll see you later.